So this is my thinking. I'm going to be away next week, thank goodness, in Montreal, enjoying my
the weather.
The weather. And enjoying some good music, and I'll have some friends for dinner on Sunday, it looks like. So anyway, it should be a nice time. But I'm thinking we can meet again on the. Today's the 3rd, so it'll be the 17th, I think, or today's the 4th or the 3rd?
Today's the 3rd.
3rd. Okay, so we meet on the 17th, and have St. Patrick's Day if you want. I mean, it's up.
Sure.
Yeah. And so we'll go from that. And what I thought I'd do on the 17th is kind of just do a kind of summary, right? Kind of circular summary of where we started, where we are, right? What's in between, and kind of try to bridge to the next course as well, what I plan to do in terms of, I'm going to probably call it in the archives of Western Marxism, or archives, of, tendency, philosophical tendencies in Western Marxism, something around that. But I would begin with Lukács, since that's always the starting point. I think you'd read Lukács in a very different way after this. It's kind of like you read Marcuse differently after this. You have a different kind of encounter with Adorno. So I think this has been very, for lack of a better term, a very healthy approach to these, very fundamental texts especially of the 20th century. Yeah, and maybe where we can go. So I'll do that as well. And then
That looks like you.
It does
Chris.
look like you.
You really just made my whole weekend. You have no idea.
I think it, don't you think so?
well,
He looks
Rachel's
just
buying
like her.
dinner tonight.
All right, let's
Oh
not
my God!
exaggerate.
Don't you think that looks like
Yeah.
Let me take a look. I mean, she looks like Rachel.
Yeah, she looks like Rachel. Now Rachel's got 2 people to buy dinner for. Oh boy. Yeah.
Seriously, I'm so on, Chris. What am I going to do?
It's hilarious.
It's good, huh? Yeah, very
I
good.
thought it was you and something you designed, although
It would be something I designed in that color and shape. It's
The
true.
big suit.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Chris,
Cool.
you know me well.
Cool.
In a much nicer light than I am, but that's okay.
So, okay.
So we're gonna read like
When are we going to start that one too? Yeah.
I would probably like to do that at the end of March.
So
End of
like
March.
what?
Yeah, end of
31st?
March.
He's
or,
like a machine.
or-
He just has trouble.
No
We
break.
got a lot
I'll
to
get a
cover.
break
We
in
have a lot to
Montreal, I
cover.
hope. Yeah.
And
I made
then
the
class.
appointments for the break.
So what do you think you're going to cover?
This,
Sort of
this
Lukács and
archives.
then...
The idea
philosophical
would be
tendencies
to
of
kind
Western
of
Marxism
give
is
people.
the next
It's going to
class.
be kind of a more of an overview. I mean, we're not going to read closely like this everything, but we'll try to extract what the arguments were. So we would read Lukács' seminal essay on reification and class consciousness of the proletariat. Kind of set that up through Heidegger's notion of objectivity and scientific objectivity, and how Lukács may still remain within what Heidegger would call the Vorhanden and world, and the Vorhanden, and we can talk about that, and also maybe how Heidegger borrows from Lukács too. I mean, that'll be one aspect of this. Then I would go on to the schools that develop out of, of course, the Frankfurt School, and I would just read, a couple of fundamental texts of that, of the Frankfurt School. Then I thought it would be interesting to do the Italian schools. One maybe seminal essay. I can think of a couple from Gramsci, and then we would go to the school of Della Volpe and Coletti, and then maybe all the way up to Negre, right? In a sense, and kind of show, these schools that work, in Italy, and then we would do the 2 French schools, the structural Marxists and the existential Marxists, right? And then
And who are they?
Well, the structural would be, of course, Althusser,
Althusser,
yeah,
yeah.
and then you do Sartres' search for a method, instead of doing the critique, the dialectical, because we could do critique of dialectical reason like we're doing this in some ways, yeah. So it would be really kind of like, refresher for some people, but at the same time a kind of, good way of locating, where some of these arguments are and how they're repeated today. Through central concept, reification, culture, industry, apparatus, Dialectic of Enlightenment. What does that really mean? It's a thing. Della Volpe, who really privileges Kant's third critique, critiques of judgment, of taste, and this kind of thing. I like Della Volpe very much, anyway, it's just a personal thing of mine. And a lot of people came out of that completely unknown in the States, like Valentino Gambino, and have all kinds of cast of characters that have never really been translated. To me, yes, that's right. Right. And then anyway, part of the problem is Italian Marxism was so rich during the 70s, and only a little bit of it came in, to the States. Only very little, and it's been forgotten. And it's always privileged around Negre, whereas Tronti's book is, Tronti's book is I think it's in process of translation. Mario Tronti's book on labor, it's on labor. Very, very good book. Tronti is really the person behind,
Was he at Padua as well?
He probably was at Padua. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Yeah, but Mario Tronti, some of his stuff is translated. He's very good, but there's going to be a revisiting of Tronti. And I think this is going to be going forward. So anyway, that's what we do, and then talk about the English as kind of plot summarizers. Right? Well, I said, you already knew what I was going to say. Right.
No biases.
No biases at all. Very good historians. In some ways, but in terms of really original thinking within the tradition,
What about Americans?
I think Caldwell, studies in illusion, further studies in a dying culture, illusion and reality, as books on poetry, all of this was good. He was decent, right? But I think too much still within the Soviet, schools, right, in a sense, whereas in Western Marxism, the creative schools were the Frankfurt School, obviously the Althusserian School, to a degree the attempted synthesis by Sartre. Sartre was very popular in Latin American struggles. Critique of dialectical reasoning, particularly the sections on practical inert, were read extremely closely by radicals in Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, certainly somewhat in Venezuela, but really in Argentina and Brazil, were the two places. And psychoanalysis, Lacan was on the reading list, part of the core requirements in some of the schools in Argentina.
American figures of the time.
Well, we could talk about, one thing I can think about doing, and I thought I would extend this because we're probably not going to have enough time to do this by the time I leave in June to cover all the bases, so we would extend it into next September or something like that with a little break. Obviously the Kenneth Burke Sidney Hook controversy of the 1930s and the arguments about the dialectic. And Kenneth Burke's daughter, by the way, Eleanor Leacock, who was a professor of anthropology at CUNY, wrote a brilliant introduction to the origin of the family, private property, and the state. It's an absolutely brilliant 55-page essay. Very, very good, Better than Engels's book in some ways. What she does there. Sometimes this happens. Yeah. That's what we're hoping for your essay on Lenin. Right. So anyway, that would be kind of the tendency. In the States, it was really Sidney Hook was known as the Marxist philosopher. Marxism in the States really took its place in history department sociology, never really made it to philosophy. Hook was the only one of some philosophical weight who actually engaged Marx, you had people later like Ronald Aronson at Wayne State who took up Kevin Anderson, who's in the West Coast now, the Marxist humanist projects, Raya Dyanoshenko, those kind of people. Yeah, but I'm just saying these tendencies, all of whom come out of, Kant, Hegel, Marx and the structuralists, out of Spinoza, mainly the.
What about
the
the
Aryan.
like the BLA's letter to the black movement, or is it more like a polemical text, or is it a philosoph? I have never read it, but I keep hearing about it. Or is it more like a polemical text?
Yeah, I mean that's hard to say. Yeah, these are more political
Yeah.
tracks than
Like
philosophical,
manifestos,
investigations or. I mean, the interesting thing about Sartre is that he really attempts to take this philosophy of subjectivity into Marxism. Right, he really tries to do this. Whether he's successful or not is another story. In terms if you're going to submit him to the logic of formal and pragmatic contradictions. But on the other hand, there is that attempt that's going on in the critique of dialectical reason, and he comes up with some crucial concepts, and especially one that's very valuable today, which is the practico-inert. How does practice become inert matter? How does practice ultimately, lose its force and can not go to the next synthetic level, right? So he's very good at this. You see Sartre, the critique of dialectical reason. Yeah.
Kenneth Burke he's the literary critic.
Yes,
he
he
also
is.
is Marxist.
Yes, he was in the beginning. Yes.
What was his argument with Sidney Hook?
Well, I have to get it to you. I mean, Hook seemed to have won the argument, in terms of the movement of the dialectic. But, it was kind of the standard arguments about what is dialectics, and Burke took a more, kind of a more traditional approach to it. Hook was, seemed to be more imaginative. This took place in Partisan Review in the I think the 30s. Partisan Review used to have a lot of this stuff going on. Yeah. What?
Didn't Hook move to the right, become reactionary?
Yes, totally.
towards the end?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this is a problem in the United States. Yes. Yeah.
I don't understand that.
You have all these people that, start out standing in their youth, and then by the time they're 45, 50 years old, they become, taken in by the other side. Yeah. And Hook was at, NYU.
How's that possible?
Yeah. It happens
How's that
every
how's
day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
John Dos Passos made that move.
Dos Passos was another one. Richard Wright, to a degree, even. Yeah. The author of Native Son and Black Boy and
Really?
Well,
Savage
He got
Savage
really
Holiday
conservative.
Yeah.
came back. The God That Failed, right, was one book, and then in a certain way never became a liberal. He never became a conservative, but he certainly was anti-communist.
I see.
Right.
Oh, anti-communist.
Well, he had a
Okay.
horrible experience in
Yes.
the Communist Party.
Yes, he
He
did.
was
Yeah.
bodily thrown out of the Labor Day March, I think.
Yes,
I
he
see.
was. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, the Communist Party could turn anybody on. No, it's.
I'm sure Michel Foucault, if he was here. Oh, yes. I know. Yes. C'est bon.
So when, sorry, do you want to start this?
I mean, I could either do it on the first week of Saturday in April. No, that's April. Is that
7th.
April Fool's Day?
No. April
That's
7th.
Easter. April 7th is the first Saturday. I could do it then, or I could do it the week before, which was March, I guess, 31st, right? Yeah, something like that. And then if you want to still do this brunch,
Yeah.
I'm up for that. Yeah. I've been thinking about that too.
Great.
Yeah.
I have some good metaphors, the fisherman and the rhinoceros, right? Thinking through the animal world here. On finance, right?
Yeah, the finance
When
branch.
when is the brunch that?
Rachel's
It's up to you.
the creator of this.
It's
yeah.
up to you. I can do it
Yeah.
whenever.
We would go to Rachel's place on Sundays, for kind of informal, engagement with markets, money, and monsters, or something like that. Yeah. Talk about, I would probably look at, Marx's fictitious capital there. I mean, if you want to read stuff, and then we would look maybe at the formation of the joint stock companies and Hilferding. I would do it through periods. Then I would go to, what's going on Wall Street simultaneously. So we would create this kind of, parallel movement, if you will, a montage between what's going on Wall Street, what's going on in the critique, and then.
How about markets and the bestiary of markets? Since you're going to do
I like
fish,
that. I'm writing it down, Chris. I'll cite you.
Bears-
Always give
bears
credit
and
where it
bulls.
does. Yeah.
fish and what
Yes.
was the other one?
The rhinoceros.
Rhinoceros,
I like the rhinoceros.
fish,
Right.
bears, bulls, and any
Yes.
other.
Yes.
Tigers
Very
and
good.
flies.
The bestiary. Yeah, I like this. Markets and animality. Markets and the bestiarity, animality
Not
today.
bestiality. Bestiary.
Oh, the bestiarity. Oh, you want a museum
I was
here.
thinking
I didn't know you were such a liberal.
Much more perverted
Yeah,
to
much more.
bestiality.
Whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, I know, that's true. Yeah. That's true.
Depend on animal
Yeah.
spirits.
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah. The animal spirits of Keynes. Yeah, Keynes called the animal spirits. He used that phrase of Descartes. That's Descartes' phrase, by the way. Yeah. It's Descartes' phrase that the 20th century.
It's kind of the insult,
Yeah.
right, from Keynes' point of view.
It was the animal
The
spirits.
animal spirit.
He wasn't that good. He played the market from his bed half an hour every morning in Bloomsbury, but he was not that successful. John Maynard Keynes.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Descartes.
What's that?
I thought you were talking about Descartes.
No, Descartes, the markets, the markets were open. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, he was in Amsterdam about 5 years after the market was founded. That's where he wrote parts 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6 of the Discourse on the Method. He was in Amsterdam. People leave you alone. He has a nice phrase about settling in Amsterdam. It's busy, but everybody minds their own business. It's perfect for solitude. That's what he said. Yeah. And then he went back to France, and Anyway, so I mean that's kind of the idea. So we could maybe begin with this brunch, kind of open it up. So I could send out, we can do this and send out a kind of reading list, right? For this.
Dodd and Mead.
Who's this?
Give a read Dodd and Mead. That's the equity analysis, the basics.
Yeah, I know who they are. Yeah, but we're not gonna. We're gonna read this
Too
stuff.
dry.
Too dry.
Reading a financial statement.
Well, I thought what we would do, I would bring in a copy of we deconstruct Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and Financial Times. That could be a kind of practical exercise.
You're not going to look at a company and at their.
I can do that too through an annual report. Look at the books if you want. You want to do that? You can do that
No.
as a,
So
You like doing that?
Gonna have
You
a
brought it
Bloomberg
up.
box sitting there.
Yeah. I mean, I could ask them if they'd let us use the Bloomberg trading station downstairs,
Yeah.
but I
They
don't
have
think
one?
they're going to open up. They do. They have
Yeah.
but they don't use it here. It's idiotic. It's
What?
called the
Really? They
trading
don't
floor.
use it?
No, they're
Spent a lot
idiots.
of money.
Don't they?
Totally
What?
idiots. Totally idiots. Totally.
What's
They
such
supposedly, I heard, got a good deal on the equipment. So what? I mean, why not use it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but
When
just
I
the
taught at
subscription,
Baruch,
the
they had
subscription to it is
marvelous
$50,000 a month.
50,000 a month.
displays
Oh my
of
God.
trading and all
Right.
kinds of
Right.
financial data.
Can we use it?
Yeah, really.
I'm getting good on the algorithms. I covered a short on the market the minute it turned from the 370-point deficit, started to recover on Friday. So I was perfectly timed with the algorithm. You do that once in a lifetime, you're perfectly timed with these
Did
things.
you sell your steel stocks?
I don't have any steel stock. The
I
only steel I
counted.
like is Stalin. You had steel stocks. You have
What?
U.S. Steel.
No, I'm
Sounded
mostly
great.
liquid and cash.
Okay. All right, good. This is what we do at brunch. We talk about liquidity and, Okay, anyway. I'll try to figure out something that could be interesting.
Maybe globally, are we heading for a new trade war a la 1930s?
He just announced tariffs on cars from Europe. This is the
Oh, really?
latest
Today?
thing. Yeah, I
Who
don't.
buys cars from Europe? Mercedes has a plant in Alabama. Nissan has plants all throughout the South.
BMWs in South
BMW,
Carolina.
and by BMWs,
VWs in
yeah,
Mexico.
and VWs all over the
Prius is
hemisphere.
all-
Maserati.
Right?
Yeah.
So the war is
Oh, that's
against
right.
NATO.
Yeah, there you
I guess I
I
won't
don't
be able
know.
to buy
It
my
doesn't make any
lunch
sense.
this
NAFTA
year.
versus NATO, and I hear he's
doesn't make any sense.
now he's revisiting the TTP.
Wait, appealing?
No, this is going back.
Yeah, amazing.
So it's
huh?
against finance elites, in a sense.
There
Well,
you go.
No, not really.
It's,
I mean,
it's,
yeah,
it's symbolic.
Yeah, it's symbolic.
It's symbolic.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Europeans
Protectionism in
Yeah.
the worst sense, right? Yeah.
put up tariffs on blue jeans, Harley Davidsons, and they picked each state where that's a Trump state to boycott, to raise
Yeah.
the tariffs on that particular product. So
Right.
Harley Davidsons are going way up for tariff.
Are you thinking of
I was hoping, they're much cheaper because you can't sell them overseas. But what was the third thing? It was Harley Davidson's, blue jeans, and
Jeans?
blue jeans.
They already moved all of the factories this year to Mexico. They like,
well, it's
Yeah.
Well, I hope they get rid of the TTP.
Is that in the books even? Or?
No, it's not yet.
No.
I
He
mean, what
wants
it
to
does
revisit
with
it.
pharmaceuticals
Yeah.
is
Well, yeah, it's big
amazingly
pharma
bad.
there.
Yeah.
Involved
Yeah.
there. Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Okay, well, enough of the disclosiveness of. Right, right. So I thought today, and I was saying before Phil and David came, that probably what I'll do is I'm going to be away next week, and I'll be back on the 17th, I think it is, for another session. I'll try to get this room. You know, it seems like it's been fairly open and it's been pretty easy. So knock on the new wood here. But anyway, the new floor. We'll meet, again, and what I do in that is just kind of summarize, what we've done, and kind of, field any questions, and then maybe try to bridge to, the next go round, and really talk about it. I still consider this to be the fundamental text, systematic philosophical treatise of the 20th century. This is my judgment, and I still think it's the major work of and it has spawned nothing but commentary, both left and right, and the interesting thing is very few liberals and very few Democrats take it up. It's either a left or a right kind of semi kind of commentary. It's interesting that you don't get the Rawls of the world or the civil society kind of people taking up Heidegger. So it's interesting to me, it's the Sartres, it's the Axelos from the party, the Sartre and the independent fellow traveler in France. It's Althusser, who obviously read this and knew a lot about this, doesn't really cite Heidegger. I think he mentions once in his thing. I know Bolivar knows Heidegger, somewhat. So it becomes, in some ways, yeah. And then on the right, obviously, certain appropriations, have been done, over the years, and there's been this attempt in the United States. There was a Heideggerian moment where Richard Rorty said it's okay to read Heidegger, and we need to take him into account. And that was the person who kind of started this, right, in philosophy, whereas Heidegger had been studied before, and I put the names up, John Wilde at Harvard, and William Barrett, who was at NYU, and a few other people who were very avid readers of Heidegger, and he became part of John Macaret, the Jesuits, interestingly enough, people that were of the Catholic persuasion, right? And yeah. So it's kind of interesting, the reception and where we're going, etc. But again, to me, if you look at Vidkun Stein's philosophical investigations, I think you can kind of frame that within a section of this book, right, in terms of these levels of inquiry about speech and language. And I think that obviously other people will. Certainly in the Marxist tradition, Lukács has always been thought of as the philosopher par excellence, or at least the one that starts everything, and he does with Theory of the Novel. It's a very radical left approach, but again, I don't know if it has the the resonations, at least with subjectivity again that we're dealing with, and a theory of, and a different way of looking at history, and certainly temporality. I mean, Lukács is about the social ontology. He deals with the ontic all the time. He's going to write books on labor, right? Then he'll do Hegel, and in the later work, he goes back to kind of an ontology to kind of flesh out his career, and so anyway, so we'll talk about this. I mean, in some ways, but again, it's my judgment again that there's so much richness here that can be worked with, and I mean, to me, I'm beginning to see this. It's taken a long time in a way. I mean, but I've kind of known it intuitively for a while. I mean, or an intuitive, grasp of this. But this, in some ways, is a long conversation with Nietzsche. This book as well, and that's gotten very few commentaries, about what kind of very deep conversation with Nietzsche it is, especially the Nietzsche of the untimely meditations, not so much the genealogy of morals, but the and the book on history, right? Yeah, and you have some thoughts?
No,
about it?
No, I mean definitely.
Yeah.
The uses and disadvantages of history for life, like we were talking about last.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to do this again just to kind of begin to situate us for today. Let me do it this way. I kind of thought about this a little bit. So, let's just take, we're in life, right, in history, the uses and abuses of history for life, as Nietzsche's kind of phrased, the advantages and disadvantages of history for life. So anyway, there are three respects here. You have the one who acts, maybe Sherman here, and strives, being and acting, right? In respects, right, in a way, and this is the monumental. In the Nietzschean sense, and for Heidegger too, So, in this sense, it's the person who both sketches, we have the examples, models, right? All of these things are in the monumental, right? The sketch, the examples and the models, all part of the monumental, etc. Right? And then you have the second one is the preservation. I mean, I think I talked about this last time. The preservation and the reverence, right? In history. And this would be the antiquarian. The antiquarian. So you have one, the monumental, and the antiquarian. And in this, it's really the past, the variations of the past is past, right? The past is past quality. A recapturing of that past, so to speak, right? And I'm going to go Heidegger too. So the monumental is the design, and let's try to do it this way. Yeah. What happened now? What happened?
Orientation.
Oh, what happened?
Orientation.
No, nothing. I have to make
What happened?
Vertical versus
Oh, I see, the orientation, I got you. Yeah, all right, I got you, okay. So design is here delivered to its thrownness, right? Over, right? To its thrownness. Right, and the possible becomes in the repetition. So repetition begins to play a lot here. And this is, the beginning, the acting and the striving, right, in this sense, right? You should become aware of your project, you become aware of your facticity, your thrownness, right? how you're thrown into history, into a historical moment. Very much like Marx says, man is someone who makes history, but he is thrown into objective circumstances that are not of his own doing. You know, Marx has a phrase very much like this about thrownness, right? But for Heidegger, that thrownness goes beyond just the objectivity again, because we're thrown into the, quote, ready to hand, right? Not the present to hand, not the objectivity of history, so to speak, right? You know, you're taking a step back from the objectivity of history, right? A step back from scientificity. All right. So anyway, let me go on here. So the antiquarian becomes the unity of you know, and on the way in the unity of future and having been. Yeah. So the unity. And those of you that have read, you know, somewhat carefully the section on being towards death, what Heidegger's really trying to do there is a structural unity, right? The totality. This is what gives you unity, wholeness, and the totality is this encounter, if you will. Yeah. Okay. So so you reverently, you're protecting, right? You protect, so to speak, or you preserve the having been. This is the moment of this preservation, right? So in some ways, the antiquarian in Nietzsche is close to the unity of future and having beenness in Heidegger. This preserving the past, right? The tradition. Remember, we spoke heritage last time. You know, so heritage would also be here too, right? Heritage,
Right.
right? And then the present, right, as the moment, right? You know, and this also is where the possibility is taken up, is in the antiquarian. The past is past, because this is what's going to spring you forth towards the future, right? So, you know, again, a historical example, you know, reconstructing Lenin, so to speak. You know, that is a way of doing history where the antiquarian, right, this monumental in your paper, for example, is being destroyed while you're so antagonistic towards the Ukrainian.
The regime.
The sketch, the regime, right? The models and the sketches are all being, you know, disrevered, disrespected in a certain way, and you're trying to bring back the having business in a having business in a repetition towards the future. Just like, you know, in a way. You can think of all these terms, you know, futurism begins really with Marinetti, and it's a, you know, a thing about speed and all of this. Now we have Afrofuturism. What does this mean? You know, this is the kind of the justification somewhat for some people of the Black Panther movie, that it's within the tradition of, you know, Afrofuturism. I saw the eyes. Yeah, I understand.
Futurism, Marinetti actually.
What's that? I'm
people
sorry?
think that Marinetti was sort of kind of a technological positivist, or
Yeah.
But he actually wrote.
Treatises on this.
Yeah, what he actually said, that it was going to end in failure and ruin.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes, that's right. It was a pessimist.
In the ditch of
Yes, right.
you know,
Right.
of the rolled over car.
So here in a way, the futurism, so to speak, in a way, speaks to speed as completely destructive. Because what speed does, and, you know, going back to a person like Stiegler, for people that have read Stiegler, you know, the sections on speed in there, is that what speed does is it basically erases the possibility of the antiquarian and the heritage in some ways. Or the heritage becomes, again, hyponemata, history becomes, you know, in the memory of Rachel Comey, right, or whatever. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not being bad. I know she's not watching, so. So anyway. Yeah. Teared up, huh? Yeah,
Teared up,
okay.
yeah.
Teared up. Okay,
Tears.
very beautiful.
The only
All
other
right,
time I've
so,
seen her cry
yeah.
was.
So this is
when her
the
bank account
taking
was-
up.
With
So
the what?
part of the problem,
Her bank
what's
account
being
was
blocked, when I've said this before, this is a generation without a future, really, in the sense because they cannot have that taking up the possibilities of the having been. You know, in a way, because the speed and the alacrity of the digitalization, you know, the algorithmic systems, homo datum, to use Artaud's phrase, are erasing, you know, this moment. This becomes very interesting in terms of what is history at this point, right? In a way, both Heidegger and Nietzsche in conversation, you know, yeah. So yeah, what were we going to say, Josh? That's
I mean, it also seems short-circuited. Like this generation has no future because you can have immediately an historical model that's available, kind of aesthetically, right?
Right.
So we were like living out the '90s over and over again in fashion or in art, you know. But you don't really have the model of what they were doing in the '90s. The sort of you know, what was
It's like
really
virtual.
happening,
Everything is
yeah.
virtual. It's sort of
Right.
make believe.
Superficial.
It's a mediocre, the
Yeah.
mediocrity of the average representation of
Exactly.
what the '90s might have been.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the '60s, you're going to see all these kind of things.
The
I mean,
haircuts.
because you're running out of, you know, and Walter Benjamin is very good on this. I mean, again, I suggest read the work of art in the age of technical reproduction carefully, slowly and carefully, because he speaks about this in a way that the technological is positive, that it can be used for revolutionary purposes, but at the same time, capitalism will get to the point where it's so run out of ideas, right, et cetera. Yeah. You know, and to me, this is where, I mean, I don't know, has anybody else seen Black Panther movie? No.
You saw it?
I went.
No, you did. You saw it.
Horrible.
You gave them money.
It was bad, huh?
I got a free ticket.
All right. And tell us about it. I want to hear about this.
Well, I mean, first of all, the Black Panther Party themselves are really cast as villains in the film.
Really?
This
Are
is
you
really
serious?
the problem.
Wow.
The real problem is that, look, you
That's
can read it
incredible.
in multiple levels. I have many layers to all of this, but let me just finish this real
Okay.
quick.
Okay.
Go back to this. But I
That's
went
terrible.
Monday night.
That's terrible.
you know. And I have
You didn't
friends
tell us
who are
that.
on the left that are praising this
No,
film. It's
come on.
great for the. I'm serious.
So it's a
all
form of
over-
I've
erasure.
heard
It's
it.
erasure
Yeah.
of historical memory.
Of course.
Well,
On
I'll
one
talk
level.
about that. So this is
Back
the
to-
moment.
back to Marty Heidegger.
So yeah, right. 1, 2, 3. Heidegger loved this. We're going to discuss Black Panther. Right. So the present as the moment, right, is really what's going on here, right? Is the third thing of you know, and this basically discloses authenticity. And of course, it's the future in which you're authentic, right? You know, there's no such thing, quote unquote, as the authentic past, which is something we can talk about, you know, but no, so it's the futural that is going to do, you know, the moment that decides, quote, the authenticity. What are you going to say?
Is there a future present, or an authentic present though, or is it only in the future?
Well, I mean, the moment, you know, this is an old category, you know, for Heidegger, is the now itself, this blink of an eye, an Augenblick,
Right.
is it a sign,
So you would
right,
know.
in the eye, the blink of an eye, where the Enlightenment, or, you know, to use the language that's used in American culture all the time, I had an epiphany, right, something
I
like
see,
that,
I see.
you know, so something like, yeah, please, yeah.
If you
yeah.
fold the Nietzschean into that, then the third category is the critique.
Yes, critical.
Critical.
Not critique. Critical. He's careful with his language, and the reason I emphasize that is critique would put him in the Kantian moment, right? Yeah, he wants to use the word critical. Critiques, right? In German, he doesn't use critique. He uses critical, and the critical, right, is basically that of is that of the one that judges, right? And it actually is looking, here you're looking for authenticity. The critical is also seeking liberation, right? Right? And the liberation is also in this delivered enthronement, right? The liberation is who acts and strives is also looking and seeking liberation. The critical is really where judgment and the condemnation takes place. Okay, so Nietzsche here is where the moment of judgment happens, right? And this is done with critical, with alacrity, speed. It's a real cut in a sense. In Heidegger, the present is the moment discloses the authenticity. Okay? So there's a conversation going on here with Heidegger, from Heidegger to Nietzsche about history. If this helps. I'm trying to kind of make it more open-ended here because, again, what Heidegger recognizes, and I think, other people have recognized this too, certainly came out in the 70s, I, Hegel, am God. And that God, ultimately, the end of Western metaphysics, culminates with Hegel as I am God, absolute knowing, as absolute knowledge, that the full circle has taken place in the history of philosophy. So Hegel becomes the great castrator of the future. Right?
That's what we're in.
That's what we're in a Hegelian universe. It's true. Right. And that Nietzsche, the problem for Heidegger with Nietzsche, listen for a second, the problem is that Nietzsche is still within that tradition because all he does is he reverses by the God is dead, right, and beyond good and evil. He only reverses Hegel. He doesn't, overcome or step outside of that tradition fully. There's only a reversal going on, right? So this is one of the things that he has with Nietzsche. Whether this is, the right reading is another story. That's open, again, to interpretation and struggle. Yeah. But do you kind of understand this? He sees from Plato, and as the Clash used to say, the other one, Gang of Four and Rin Tin Tin. They used to have a very good thing. You remember the Gang of Four, the punk band?
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day. You don't remember them? They used to say, what do the masses know from Plato to Rin Tin Tin? And Rin Tin Tin was a German Shepherd, stupid TV dog, Yeah, it was used in TV series.
Yo, ready.
Yeah, you're ready. Right. So, but anyway, going back to this, Plato to Hegel is part of this whole trajectory. I, Plato, am the truth. Why Nietzsche will start with Twilight of the Idols, undoing the Platonic idealism, but that this culminates in Hegel, right? With I, Hegel, am the truth of absolute knowledge, right? All in the Geist, the phenomenology of the Geist, and the logic of being, becoming, in a sense, right? That it's ultimately this trajectory, this striving, if you will, towards God that plays out in German Romanticism, in Faust. There are many, many levels here, but even the God is dead of Nietzsche remains within just a reversal of something that already exists. Much like I told you about Kloskowski's work on de Sade. The de Sade is not, atheism is not enough. Right. Because it presupposes already that God was here.
Was
here.
Yeah.
Right? Okay? So this is what Heidegger's trying to avoid in some ways, right? And the Springum is a leap. This Ursprung that I'm talking about is always a leap into the future in a certain way. It's a leap to the future.
It's a circle.
Yes, it's always a circle. No, you got it. No, absolutely. No, very, very good. Yeah, no. I mean, it is a circle.
Yeah.
It is the circle. You leap into the circle. This is not gradual. Listen, I'm still trying to work this out, a pedagogy of rupture. Rupture versus revolution in some ways. Not really versus, but, alongside. And should we be thinking really more rupturing, from certain things, then what is the revolution? Since it turns again all the way around, do we end up at a kind of starting point that still is this kind of circular turning, or does the rupture to the outside?
Right? So
Well, it's very Platonic,
the notion
and
of
it's
regime
also
change in Plato, right?
Yeah.
The oligarchy's kids over time
Yes.
become the
I
revolutionary
mean, we're
energy,
still
and
living
then-
Plato.
Yeah.
I mean, what is all this nonsense?
The
of
Thermidorian
Yeah.
moment of the revolution
Yeah.
that people expect in every revolution,
Yeah.
it's going to kill itself like
Yeah.
the French and the Russians did, and Stalin's purges are equivalent to the reign of terror and Robespierre. There's an interpretation that's pretty popular out there.
Right. Well, the idea here is always that you're going to have this repetition in Heidegger in the second moment, which is comparable to the antiquarian.
Is
right?
this where Deleuze picks up difference in repetition? Is this a commentary on this movement?
It could be. I mean, at one level, this could be used as a background to think through Deleuze's
Because he emphasizes the
difference.
difference.
Yes.
Right?
Well, difference is
Yeah.
really, how one, and the difference is really the ontological difference, between that of, the ontic and the ontological, in a sense. Yeah. Before we
It's
get
another
to sexual
book, another
difference.
book to read for a
you
couple
have
of
to.
years.
Yeah. Well, it's a very transitional work in
Yeah.
the French, I mean, again,
They call it
the
the
great
Deleuze
commentaries on being in time, if you will. The first commentary is Being in Nothingness by Sartres in France, right? The next commentary after that is Deleuze's Difference in Repetition. The commentary after that is Being an Event, and then being, Logics of World, and now Immanence of Truth. I mean, even though they're polemical with Heidegger, it's still a commentary to begin with. And that puts where's the role, too, of philosophical commentary here, that's a starting point always. You have to be able to do the commentary until you get to the originative, if you're going to do any kind of original work. And part of the problem is we're always still being thrown into these work where the groundwork has all been done, and we're doing commentary at a certain level. So, you can have an insight into a labor practice, but it's still not, ultimately an insight, right? You can write a great book on labor in the digital economy, and it might be an original work for those studies, but it's a regional study, and it's not a fundamental breakthrough in terms of these kind of things that are happening here. This is always the difficulty. Why philosophers are so crazy. And so I'm always looking for that. I decided a long time ago, you just do the commentary and, think about it and try to, do your own work within those frameworks. Because if you're thinking you're going to go out there and outthink Heidegger, Vidkun Stein, Deleuze,
It's too much.
people, I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, this comes around once every, 300-400 years. I mean, and in a way, we're still understanding what he's saying. I mean, there's, again, the reaction, in a way, maybe some of it rightfully so. I'm not going to, that this word that I put up earlier here, the resolve towards authenticity, towards the eigen, the proper, making one's own, etc., which is part of the authenticity, is basically a call to militarism, facing death all the time. Yes, in some ways it may be, but that's not the whole story, right? And this is the problem, that this becomes a language, right, thing. And, but then we see how this is used by the culture, how it becomes used by popular culture, this is yours, right? You're going to be sold to give you your authenticity, the way we say the real deal. All these kind of things play off this kind of jargon, right?
So
Instead of a
everything is
philosophical.
exegetical, except for
What do you mean by? I'm just
What's
just
that?
curious. I'm sorry.
exegetical is a
I know
kind
what
of
exegesis is,
commentary,
yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
mostly applied to the commentary on the Bible.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's trying to understand godhood or the circle squared.
Yeah. Right. Exegesis. Right.
I see.
Yeah. Exegetical. Right. You're taking off on what you unfold the text through a commentary on that text.
Yes,
Right. Right.
yes.
It becomes taken up by Schleiermacher as a new kind of hermeneutic, a new
Okay.
principle of, this goes on in the 19th century as principles of interpretation, new principles of interpretation.
So
Yeah.
what is Jesus without the X? He said, I mean, I sort of.
Jesus, you said, or?
Jesus.
Oh, exegesis?
Yeah.
X
No, maybe
and
Jesus too, I don't
Jesus,
know.
right?
Ex-Jesus.
I mean, I get a job on Madison Avenue. Fuck this, you know. Right. Exegesis. X used to be a Jesus, right? Yeah. Right.
So it means out of what, though?
It's the marginalia.
Yeah, it's the
what you write in
marginality.
the
How do
Out of the
you
text.
how do you
Out of the body
unfold
of
the
the text,
text
yeah.
through the body of the text? Right. Yeah.
Like Derrida, margins. What
Well,
you
margins
comment in the
comes from. Let me tell you where
margins.
margins comes from. It's the fool, is the magri, in the marketplace. The margins are really the place where the fools are making commentary, ridiculing the discourse. This is where this is materially located. I mean, I know they don't teach this stuff in graduate school, but when you dig a little deeper, you begin to see it's the mad people outside on the margins, right, that are making fun of the discourse in the marketplace.
Same thing for obscene, obscena.
Yes, very good. That's right. Yeah.
Now your turn.
No, I am obscene, so you justify.
No, I meant your
I'm just
turn, not
teasing.
that.
Yeah, turn
Obscene
that
means
back. Yeah.
in
No,
drama
you're right.
means
The obscene is good, and a lot has been done by that by some clever people.
Yeah.
Some people have done a lot of work with this, but the exegetical is a common practice among the especially among religious interpreters, right? And when you do textual exegesis, that means Stanley always uses the phrase "close reading." That close reading is a little different. It's more of this sense of the exegesis is really you're taking apart a text, right? You're showing what's going on in it, almost line by line. The use of the verb in the sentence. What is the predicate, right? How is this working out? How does this play out? In a way, it doesn't have to be logical, but you're just showing, what is actually, occurring there, right?
That's what you wanted to do.
How does that relate? How does that relate to like the close reading of the 50s?
The close reading of the 50s was, I think, much more formalistic. In a sense, very formalistic.
Right.
And the close reading of the 50s was really based on, looking for rhetorical tropes and ploys in a text. There was much more of an emphasis on rhetoric, as far as I know, from the University of Chicago, especially the Chicago School, which there was an attack upon. I mean, look, Chris knows, and maybe some of you know this, Ogden and Richards. And Ogden was the translator, by the way, both of Vidkun Stein's Tractatus and also of the philosophy of as if. C.K. Ogden and Richards were the authors of a book called The Meaning of Meaning, right? And this was a fundamental literary text, that was used for many generations from 1930 probably up through the 60s, right? And then there came a new school of criticism from Warren and Wellick. Renee Wellick, and I forgot what's Warren's first name. You don't remember these people?
What is it? It was a terrible book. I'm trying to
Yes,
think.
another terrible book. So anyway, these became principles of reading, and when you refer to the Chicago School, it's really about the rhetorical tradition that's inherited from Aristotle, from a very many years of reading Aristotle's rhetoric that is put into practice by the English professors at that point, right? And the first person to kind of confront that was Wayne Booth at Chicago, who wrote a book called, I think, The Rhetoric of Irony, right? And where he began to privilege irony as a moment in the text always. It goes back to, obviously, to Socrates, but a kind of rethinking of that as well. So these are all very complicated moments, but again, back to the word exegesis, this was not used by the Marxist tradition as a term, right? If you don't find exegesis in Eichenbaum,
No, Chicago, it was
Shklovsky.
reactionary.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Well, when I say religious, I mean reactionary too. I mean, it's just code, right? I mean, yes, of course, yeah.
But religious exegesis was progressive compared to the Chicago school.
Okay, well, I mean, there are just many battles around this. The Russian formalists, for example, were much more interested in the form that you could write a long treatise on a coat, in the overcoat, and and this becomes the meaning, right, that one will have, that the formal meaning and the symbol of a coat is the key to interpreting the text. Right?
They would also say how form shows meaning.
Yes, right,
the
always,
form
yes.
of
That's
a
what I'm saying.
book.
The overcoat, is one example that they used, right? Right. The form in the text itself, but around the symbol of the overcoat. For example, this was one of Eichenbaum's great studies, right, if you will, formalist studies. Bakhtin was part of that movement, where you begin to get the distinction, and this is something this generation really needs, the difference between signal, right, and sign. Right? You signal something, but you're not really giving material sign, right, in a certain way. This is ideological, fully ideological. This is a kind of an attempt to break up the ideology of the signal, what's being done. So Bakhtin, in a book called Marxism and the Philosophy of Language, begins to deal with this. So these are things going around
Heidegger.
Heidegger.
By Voloshinov.
Well, that's Bakhtin.
Okay.
That's what they say.
But that's strange because he never really.
He never claimed Voloshinov.
And it's a Marxist text, and Bakhtin's. But maybe he was going through a Marxist phase.
Well, Bakhtin was certainly Marxist in some of his work.
I guess so.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I'm not,
No, I just read it part of his diaries.
Well, no, I mean,
that were recently published.
Yeah, he was put out to pasture by the Stalin moment. I mean,
he was a monarchist.
Yes,
politically, but that's okay. It's kind of like Heidegger.
He wrote about.
In the context of it was not a monarchist in the 20s.
He wrote about the language of the street, of the popular,
and his brother was a Trotskyist.
Right,
who actually was a roommate of Vidkun Stein's in England. Nikolai. Nikolai. Yeah.
That's why they couldn't find Voloshinov. They're like, he disappeared.
See, we should be doing movies like this, Bakhtin and his friends.
They're like, nothing is known about this author except this book that he wrote.
We can make movies.
Right. So anyway, but again, listen.
Other than the book that he wrote.
Yeah. To go back to this, and I'm avoiding the Black Panther here for a minute.
We're aware. We got the signal. We're in tune. We got the signal.
So anyway, the signal. Anyway, but going back, you begin to see the importance of a book like Being in Time in this context, because you have schools of linguistics developing with Saussure and his brother Raymond de Saussure, a psychoanalyst, the Freudian, the psychoanalytic schools who do things with words, on the use of primal words. Freud writes that in the 1890s. So everybody's interested in language, form, right? During this period, the Russian formalists, right? You have, the Prague structuralists, another great moment that we haven't really given due to, Mukharovsky, you know the Prague structuralists?
No, I mean, I've never read anything.
Never read. Okay, so
I read the Polish. But that's different. The Kalecki school, the political economists who were
they're good.
Were very interesting.
He's
like
very good on
systemic
entrepreneurial
theory,
capital.
but it's